I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Well, today I'm speaking with Anthony Rispo. And Anthony, you are a writer and a host of a podcast called Discourse Lab. And we were introduced through CTA. I'm really interested in hearing more about what you have found in your studies as you've gone through. It's sort of a sociopolitical focus that you've taken in your education and in your work through the podcast. So I'm very curious to hear more about your story and what you've found. I know you focus on ideological extremism, among many other things. So welcome, and it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for having me on. First of all, it's a pleasure to be with you because I've been a fan for several years now, and you've kept my head up high with your work. Before we pushed record, I was telling you that many car rides listening to your podcast were very reassuring and helpful. So thank you.
Well, that's really kind of you to say. Thank you so much. I love hearing that. And it's kind of surreal also that I've been doing this long enough that I would be able to accompany people on long car rides. So that's really sweet.
It's great.
Thank
it's great.
you.
Yeah. And I guess that plays a very important role in my development. This sort of the work that you do and others in the podcast world. And it's, since 2020, I think this is a common story at this point. I say it's the first wave. I don't think it's the first wave. There are other waves, but I think of, people coming into their own awareness of their own thoughts and beliefs and values, and separating from ideology, sort of the coagulation of ideology and the social costs that you often pay when you're stuck in that space. And that's what I felt in 2020 after George Floyd, the pandemic. And I just, I guess long story short, because I think the people who are listening, your audience would already kind of know how this kind of goes, right? There were a lot of double standards when it came to COVID, social pressures, a lot of virtue signaling, a lot of social costs that you would pay if you didn't abide. And so the story goes that I felt a lot of cognitive dissonance around that, because I guess I should give a little bit of a backdrop. Prior to that, I was very much so on the political left, and I followed suit. And so with that preliminary information, which again, many listeners will already know what that's about, 2020 comes around. It was just a moment of great cognitive dissonance for me. And I began to explore that dissonance. I'd already been very interested in studying psychology. So I had some of the vernacular and some of the tools to dig into this feeling I was having. And in a more precise explanation of what I was experiencing would be getting involved in things like getting rid of the Indians mascot at the local high school and writing to the superintendent, forming a sort of a letter in a group to send out to the superintendent. And it was just a very catty, mean-spirited approach. And I felt that it was very much so against how I conduct myself with people. And, other things like getting involved in climate change movements and how the hierarchy of those movements were the kinds of people that the social justice prescription would not, find, to be the right fit, sort of a white male from an Ivy League university, not me, but somebody else who was running these programs. And And then in the spaces where these students who were part of this program would talk about issues, they were talking more about their pronouns, they were talking more about mental health, which is great, but totally sidelining the issue at hand about being there for a common purpose for climate change and stuff like that. So just, I mean, that's a kind of I'm kind of going into the weeds a little bit, and I could understand if is a little scattered, but that's the gist of some of the experiences I had. And there were some other ones that just hit me the wrong way. And then I got introduced to, people like you, Coleman Hughes, Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, and it became clear to me that I was not alone in feeling at odds with what was going on outside of me. And it evolved into this huge excavation of my own values, of my own temperament, of how I deal with ambiguity, how I deal with uncertainty. And so I began to just become more curious, and my views changed pretty dramatically actually after that. And so that's a lot to throw at you and everyone, but maybe we could pick apart some of that, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask away.
Well, it
So,
sounds like you felt almost swept away in these movements and with these social, I guess movement is a good word, like missions, climate change, or getting a mascot renamed or something. And you were almost with just sort of pulled along by what was around you and noticing
yeah,
that this felt like you said at odds with the way that you thought you should be treating people. And so
yeah,
there's sort of an unintentional quality to it, like a
hmm
almost this is just what's expected. This is what my friends are doing. What was that for you? Am I close in that, or what was it that
oh
you
yeah.
felt was pulling you towards those things? Did it seem like it was a a social good that you were seeking, or was it more mm, just going with the flow?
That's a great question, and it's funny you ask it like that because I just happened upon an old video from the first time Trump won 2016, of me sort of archetypal with I had my hair was shorter, and I had the tips of it were dyed green, and
Mhm.
I was just so upset about him winning. And any buzzword, any phrase that you would hear of the day, I said it. It's a 12-minute video. And as I was observing this video, looking back, this was just about a week ago, I found this video of me going on and on about how terrible people who voted for Trump are, and both, sort of like bashing the character of Trump supporters from an objective lens, and then talking to people who supported him, going back and forth in this kind of incoherent diatribe, and not really speaking to my concerns with a pretty consistent through line, rather just really pointing fingers. And my pain, like I had a lot of, again, this was before 2020, but I would argue that I at this point too had a lot of dissonance. And to answer your question, I think so much of what I was feeling at the time was uncertainty, being, gay myself, and kind of adopting narratives and fitting into a crowd and feeling safe in that group, or at least the sense of feeling safe, because that's a whole other issue. I never really was one to fuse to a group identity. The quote gay community was never something that I could. Lots of groups and communities and things like that were never really my cup of tea. But in particular, like when it came to my sexuality, I or when it comes to my sexuality, I don't feel pull toward the quote community, but I did adopt some of the sentiments in my 20s, that I kind of had to get on board, and just by default support the acronym in totality, LGBTQ, etc. And because I was a member of that group, right? So to answer your question, I felt like I would say I could confidently say that it was more about keeping my subscription to that group clean. And it's not that I didn't care about people. It's just looking back and knowing what I know now about how some progressive policies actually inadvertently can hurt the people that purports to support and care about. I mean, I didn't know at the time, but I thought that the right thing to do was to just lead with compassion. But I think a lot of that desire to lead with compassion came from an internal need for compassion, internal for my own compassion towards myself. Actually, I didn't have much of that, and I felt like outsourcing my autonomy to a group was more pacifying and easier. And I'm not just, I know it's easy to hear this or to hear this and it's easy to say, maybe some would say, oh, that's kind of like hindsight and you're just sort of making a story out of it. But no, I mean, it really was for 10, 12 years of my life where I thought that way. I really believed that I needed to follow suit. And that was reinforced by the fact that people were getting canceled and punished and called out and castigated. And, I remember when the All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter thing started, and I actually, I remember being sort of like on the All Lives Matter side of things, and I didn't think anything of it. It was all so new. And I was just butchered for that. And I felt that. And I said, oop, can't do this again. So yeah, I don't think it was. I hate to say that it wasn't that I didn't. It's that I didn't care. It's not quite that, but I think I cared more about not being kicked out of a group and not being looked down upon. Very high in agreeableness to that has since diminished over time. I think it's true that it could be a problem to be too high in agreeableness, and I think that was my case. So I learned to just be okay with not being liked, if that makes sense.
Oh, it's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Harder for some than others.
Yeah. Especially if you are agreeable. Yeah.
Right, for sure. It's interesting when you said that you're so as a gay man, you would be lumped into this community, and it's so there's so much about that that's very interesting. This idea of communities being groups of individuals who might be very different from one another in all sorts of ways, but share a demographic characteristic or a preference of some kind. Maybe it's a sexual orientation. So we make communities out of like we'll say the Black community or the gay community, the LGBT community, the immigrant community, and it's such an interesting linguistic technique to sort of false team disparate individuals. Right. And when you talked about being, having this tentative relationship, I suppose, with that LGBT sort of community, if you will, and you felt like as a part of that, you had to sort of support the whole thing. Yeah. So there's something in there that I feel like I want to whip out an old consumer psychology textbook, because there's something in these principles that remind me of tricks that salespeople do to get people to buy their products. There's like this principle of reciprocity where I've given you something, and so you're going to feel compelled to give me something back. So I gave you the sample at Costco, and you're going to feel a little bit bad if you don't buy the product because I gave you something, or other sorts of tricks, psychological tricks. So now we've accepted you and we've given you our approval, and you're going to have a harder time going against any of the things that we say, that we advocate for. You're going to feel a little bit of pressure, or maybe a lot of pressure, to be agreeable towards those things because we've given you our acceptance. And it reminds me of this social psychological concept and theory that the new convert is the greatest sort of cheerleader for the whatever team or cause or religion or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And so in your work, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. What have you seen around those social psychological principles?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think going back to what you said about sort of that consumer aspect, a little bit of that buy-in, the reward aspect, right? Um, it's kind of, well, it does sort of tap into our reward system, right? When we start to feel that connection with the group and that the reward of acceptance, and um, that increases our relational value. We feel like we are an asset to the group, and we have a sense of belonging, shared reality, all that stuff. And especially when you're coming from, and I would argue that many, I think a fair point would be that many individuals in the LGBTQ, et cetera, community, if you want to call it, let's just stick with community for a second, and then we can disentangle that, like you were talking about, how that is kind of odd. But for just the sake of consistency, that sort of community, it's it's interesting because it there's really it's like it's a very weird experience to enter into a space where you're supposed to feel, I in scare quotes, supposed to, you're just sort of implicitly, or just it's kind of expected that you adhere to a certain set of rules, a certain set of certain decorum, and but you all really don't have much. There's not really much in common apart from, and what I was starting to say, the fact that it's fair to say that that this group, this community, one shared thing could be that you're on the fringe a bit. You're not heterosexual. It's not the, you're on the norm. And that's not I'm not being pejorative in that sense. I'm just saying you're on the fringe. You're deviant from the norm. And so there's that shared feeling of, okay, I'm not that, but that's about it. I mean, I mean, in psychotherapy, I guess in psychology generally, there's this idea of the minority stress model, and I mean, we can get into that at some point, where it essentially postures people who would be considered, quote, marginalized, as society causing infraction on them, or infracting and constantly barraging them with demands of the norm, and that in and of itself is what causes the stress, and it's the outside stressing you and causing all these downstream effects psychologically and leading to psychopathology. And of course, this lands into the territory of the trans thing, and it's gender dysphoria. And so all of that noise, really, what it comes down to is the thing you share in that community is that you're marginalized, and that you're automatically oppressed, and that you are in a room with somebody who's the T and you're the G, and somebody's the this and that, and then you have this shared feeling of being oppressed. There's no collegial, amicable. There's nothing. Maybe I'm being too absolutist in my assessment, but my general feeling of it is that when you connect on that premise, it flattens the human experience so much, and it also demands that you adhere to this odd uniformity that isn't there. There's so much variance. So you could pull out the G and the LGBT, and you can see so much variance, so much diversity, so much, and you don't get that. You just it's a flattening of people, of humanity, and which makes it very hard to go into these particular spaces and have a different viewpoint, because you're not supposed to repudiate or push against or question gender affirming care. You're in this group. How can you do that?
Hmm.
Don't you know that? But it's so okay that we're all supposed to align on the fact that we're oppressed and you're supposed to follow suit with all the prescripts and demands. And there's no room for opening the gap between yourself and another person to explore that space of true diversity. And so much diversity between people, individuals can be found just in an encounter with a dyad, right? Let
Hmm.
alone a group of people where you can have so
Hmm.
much interesting dialogue and but no, that's a collapsed experience, and that is such a turnoff for me. So yeah, being in that community is to me a false sense of it. If you think of community in it on different terms, where yeah, you have shared reality, you have shared customs, shared heuristics and stuff, but
Hmm.
um, it, it's too collapsed, and I think then it therefore would follow that. Back to your point about well, just you mentioned it being strange that it's a community in and of itself. I don't know if you said strange, but something like that becomes an ecological fallacy. Then you start to, um, well, I guess come full circle. I'll say you start to just collapse people down to their categories, and and I think that's the route to dehumanization. Um, and yeah, I think I'll stop at that point. Maybe we can pick up with another
Yeah,
point or more.
I
Yeah.
really like how you're dissecting that and coming down to this common point of marginalization or
Hmm.
oppression or a shared focus for resentment really is what
Yeah.
that boils down to. And something that's interesting about the identity obsession
Hmm.
that was really what brought me into this whole conversation was finding a that in a counseling program we were being told to focus so heavily on demographic identities and the presumptions we were supposed to be making about people based on those identity categories and demographics.
Hmm.
I wonder how much of that it because it is reductive, as you say, it
Hmm.
kind of boils people down into these stereotypes and assumptions and presets, and it is dehumanizing. And I've said that a lot, but maybe there's a part of that is we're trying to grapple with a new world, a new social landscape in which
Yeah.
we are having to push our minds to conceptualize the humanity of such a large number of people that we are not, you think about Dunbar's number and this idea
Yeah.
that we have only a certain number of people we're meant to be able to know in our minds and really see as human beings. And this
Mm.
evolutionary arc of humans as being rather tribal and in their small groups that are limited by geography, or even if you move to a new place, now you have to plant yourself down in a new geographical setting. And we've seen since things have gone so online, and especially
Mm.
post 2020 when everybody started meeting via Zoom and working from home, now you're you're contending with a social field in which there's this vast number of people that you need to make space for in your mind. Like, how do I even conceptualize that? And in that, I
Yeah.
think it's kind of like when you look at the stars and you feel very small. When you look
Yeah.
at that
Mm.
the world of people, you can start to lose your own purpose and what meaning there is in you, and you can start to feel unimportant and small too. And so maybe this is a transitional, and I pick on it a lot because I really do think it's a harmful thing that we're dissecting people and reducing them down to identity categories. But perhaps it is representative of a transitional mm, coping or mental strategy in order to just hold this this idea of the
Yeah.
largeness of humanity in our minds. But when you talk about like the LGBTQ, what is it, IA2S, I mean, so many
Yeah.
different things, right? And you call that a community, it I think it's so important to come back and say, no, that's like a 12-year-old girl who thinks she's trans and a
Right.
happily married woman who's married to a man but is attracted to women, and so she identifies as bisexual. and
Mm-hmm.
it's a gay man who's in his 20s, and it's an elderly gay couple, and it's a autogynephilic
Right.
man who's
Right.
transitioned, and it's all these different people who are such different human beings, people who are just playing with gender fluidity, and people who are at all different walks of life. And so to put them, if you put them all in a room, you would just have a lot of different people in a room. You wouldn't have
Yeah.
a monolith. And it's the same when they say the Black community, and or the, the any one of these communities we make up. So I think it's the way that you're describing it is so useful.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said, it's making me think harder um, about the phenomenon of how we adapt, how we categorize and how we recalibrate. I think we are in a recalibration stage, or we're trying to just figure out how to deal with technology as it's advancing at breakneck speeds. And I mean, ChatGPT is just frighteningly quick. I mean,
Mm.
whoever's behind it, all the people who are behind it are just really pushing the bar all the time, and we can't keep up. I mean, uh, and kind of, I've been thinking about what you said also. What you mentioned just a few moments ago is something I've been thinking about. Is, well, we have maybe human beings, and tell me if I'm getting what you're saying correctly or not. But how do we deal with looking at the phone and seeing all these? I mean, we've been dealing with this for a while now, but just as it's evolved over the past decade or so, with more and more numbers, you know, metrics on our individual accounts, and contending with, well, thinking about it, I mean, 10,000 people looking at something that you did, even if you account for some of that being bots, I mean, it's still 500 people. It's a lot, and it's prevalent, and it's all over the place. And our brains are not quite like, we're not equipped. I mean, we're equipped, of course, because we adapt, but we're not quite there. We don't quite deal with that outer ring of, it's just this diffuse experience of, there's so much out there, and there's so much that's grabbing our attention. There's so many people, and how do we, maybe the reason why people are simplifying people to categories is for that reason, to simplify the work the brain has to do to deal with the fact that there's so much to think about. I know, we're not evolved to think about. We're not evolved to really think hard, beyond what we categorize and what we codify in the brain, and our mental maps, and are sort of established already. And as we get older, that becomes more kind of solid. And anytime we try to change a map, a mental map, or some kind of cognitive configuration of reality that we have, it takes work. It takes glucose. It takes energy, and the brain uses so much of that, the most over all the other organs in the body. And I just think we're on overload, cognitive overload. And I think the way people deal with that is I think an empirical question would be, do people reduce people to categories in order to deal with that cognitive load? That could be an interesting question. And there is a differential. I mean, you do see you see this happen with all human beings, but it is interesting how it forms differently when you put politics into the picture. If you don't take politics, or if one doesn't take politics as just this superficial phenotypic kind of thing that's a sport, but rather, an emergent expression of something much more fundamental to the human condition, and something much more biological too, even. You see a differential between what we would think of as the left and the right, and of course there's stuff in between. But it seems to be the case that there's sort of something that's called the left, and of course these labels are arbitrary because of the French Revolution, but there is something there still. There's something that we've seen throughout the millennia, throughout millennia, I should say, where human beings coalesce around something more egalitarian, and then the other end around something more hierarchical. And I think that both ends collapse people
Mm.
to categories in one way or another. But it is I wonder if it's interesting to you also. It's interesting to me and sort of confusing how the political left is so diffuse and so, quote, open with having many different categories and different people and diversity. But yet, under that pool of diversity, there's an overarching category, let's say going back to oppressed. So you have the oppressed
Mm.
category and you have such a diffusion. It's so diffuse under there.
Mm.
And it, I do think, the research literature seems to point to the a phenomenon that's very interesting, that folks on the political left, especially further out into the left, tend to score higher in trait neuroticism,
Mm.
higher levels of anxiety. That can't be a one-to-one. One can't say that,
Mm.
because you're on the left, you're going to be anxious, or the other way around. But it does seem to be a higher presentation. And I wonder if, I haven't come across this question yet. I'm sure it's out there. I wonder if some of the anxiety, I mean, of course, it's bidirectional too, but is a function of having such a diffuse sort of landscape of categories. And if that anxiety is just a way for the brain to contend with that, to reorganize and to simplify,
Mm.
so that it's very odd. I can't quite articulate it. It's just this very strange dynamic where that ambiguity and the feeling of tension around such diffusion could cause a person to feel the need to close the gap of uncertainty by collapsing a person to just oppressed or something else, and it's again, it's an empirical question, but it's something that I guess for myself I could say, and anecdotally, that I felt that tension, and I have known people to feel that tension, and where you're in a room with people that you're supposed to feel like you're in an alliance with, but you know that you're all different, and there's something there that you're not exploring, but you feel the social pressure to not explore that. And which
Mm.
is why I think that when you do explore it in those spaces, you get tarred and feathered, because it opens up that gap of it opens up uncertainty, and it causes that anxious response. And then you tend to see people on that end of things when they get anxious and they get activated, then they start with the name calling, and then they start with the, again, tarring and feathering, and so I do think that plays a major role.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting when, if you think about, just in simple terms, think about left as being more about progress or
Mm-hmm.
change. And I always think about perfecting. People have this
Mm-hmm.
perfecting tendency. We see something out of place, we need to go put it back in place. Or we see something that's wrong, and so we want to go and do something about it. So that's purpose, or perfecting and purpose are kind of, and thank you for allowing me to stumble through this, because I don't think I've articulated it like this, but I want to hear what your thoughts are after I struggle to get this out.
I struggle to get some stuff out too, so I'm glad that we're doing that together.
Yeah, we're doing
right.
it together.
Yeah, yeah.
So that if you associate the left loosely with progress or social purpose of some kind, some social mission, if you
Yeah.
will, and the right with hierarchy and definition of roles and preservation of order of a certain kind.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just loosely, and I know that there's a lot more complexity to it than that,
Sure.
then as we've become wealthier and more comfortable as people in Western nations, where even the homeless guys have really nice shoes and cell phones a lot of the time. Like, we live in a
Mm-hmm.
city with a lot of homeless people, and you see people are struggling. They're struggling. They're not doing well. but there's a level of clothing, basic needs that's being uh, that even people who are in dire straits can usually acquire. So that's the lowest, people who have really fallen through the rungs.
Hmm.
But people who are just living an average middle working class life, they have struggles, they have serious problems and issues,
Yeah.
but they have a lot of their fundamentals basically
Right.
covered. And so we've
Right.
gotten so much wealthier that, and then you have people who you ask your children, what do you want to be when you grow up? Instead of having an expectation that you're going to be whatever, you're going to go into the plumbing business with your father, or you have a thing that you have to do. Now you have all
Uh-huh.
this field of choice.
Right.
And I think people really need purpose. They really need a sense of mission. That's why you see retirees go through depression, or life is so hard after a divorce, or like you said, it's hard to reorganize your map after something
Yeah.
has happened. What that if your husband leaves you and he was the center of your life, now you've kind of lost your whole
Right.
world, and you don't know what to do and what to want and who to be. And
Hmm.
so there's these that we need purpose, we need things that drive us.
Hmm.
And so if the right, generally speaking, has purpose because they have the desire to preserve things that they think are important: tradition, religion,
Hmm.
gender roles, hard work and success, and this like theory of hierarchy that you already have
Right.
all of the things, you just need to keep doing this tried and true map.
Right. Right.
And the left
Right.
would then be representative of the people who are having that existential experience
Mm.
of not knowing how to make sense of this. And so it would it's interesting, like, to think about the social justice folks, like I think about the teacher that led my social justice class in counseling school. And
Yeah.
she's kind of this person saying, look, everybody, I found purpose. Oh, if
Yes.
you just
Yes.
come here with me and believe in this purpose with me, we can all have purpose, and our lives can really have this meaning. And I've found it, and you can have it too. And our shared purpose requires that nobody break this illusion for us. Nobody say the thing that causes us to challenge our thinking around this, because the fact of purpose is so important. And we
Right.
must unite around this mission, because this is what gives our lives meaning, because our lives were meaningless if we're having an existential crisis. What does it all mean? Who am I? And what does this, and so if you're the gay man who stands up and goes, I don't know if I agree with all of that, then
Mm.
you've just introduced doubt into the thing that
Right.
was giving people a sense of drive and meaning and that they needed.
It's an
And
affront to it. Yeah.
it's an affront.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of like a wrecking ball to that, to the purpose that we built out of existentialism, because we found
Hmm.
something we could go perfect. Oh, look, there's more stuff to perfect over here. And now
Right.
we can all gather and have this shared zeal. And there's nothing like
Right.
that. I had this experience, I've probably talked about this before, but a couple of years ago I was driving and I had a really near miss, and a really scary one. Like,
Oh my.
I was terrified. I almost had a bad wreck, and I don't
Oh
remember what it was.
gosh.
I think maybe
Yeah.
somebody skidded in front of me or something, and like but it was really scary.
That's really
And
scary. Yeah.
I thought right away in my head, I thought, I can't die now. I have so many things to do.
Yeah.
And because I like, wherever I was going, my thoughts were all about, oh, something I needed to buy, and something I was making, and somebody I needed to
Wow.
call, and my kids, and I had all these. And then I thought, isn't that what you want every moment of your life, is to have that sense of, I have so much purpose.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so just that existential dread of not having meaning, I think, is so scary. And these justice missions give people that.
That, yeah. So that, I, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go right into that. I think that that's such a good template, um, to, to build on what I'm going to say. So just from my own experience, I could definitely say, and then I'll zoom out into the broader, I guess you'd say literature on it, but um, there is, I think, a fundamental purpose, or maybe not purpose, but function to having that kind of dynamic, and where you have the sort of fixers or the people who see the problems and want to aim toward something in the future that could be better. And then you have those who just don't want to touch it. You know, there's a threat uh, sort of looming. If you touch it, you just let it be.
Mm.
It's not broken, just let it be. And I mean, that is essentially conservative and versus liberal. I mean, in that kind of more, like you said, it's more it's more nuanced and complicated. But generally speaking, yeah, to progress, to see ahead, to want to change the status quo, and to kind of make a mess in the meantime, in the meanwhile, is sometimes a good and necessary thing, in doses, and as human beings progress and evolve. But then also conserving is very important too, if you think of entropy and just how you don't want to burn out, and uh, the system's open, and it's you're not, there's give and take, there's pragmatism, sort of moving the needle a little bit. And so that's stuff. Okay, just kind of putting that as something that's more or less a baseline function, I think, in my view of human beings and society. It's a very, very simplified version of it. But then you get the more pathological expressions of it. I think that there are a lot of people who are looking for meaning, who feel at odds with themselves, who don't feel like they have a connection to order. They don't have an assembly of kind of what order is supposed to feel like, I guess, or what it does. Maybe not supposed to, but what order feels like, what structure feels like. They don't have a rendering of that. They don't have, again, a map of that. And I think that because order really helps us cohere to something, our centrality, like we come into, we individuate, we come into our own, as they say, and we start to discover ourselves because we pull away from our parents and our home and familiarity, and we have novelty, but there's always a bit of structure around that, and there are parameters that we can't go outside or else we get punished, law and order.
Mhm.
And there's this beautiful sort of finesse to growth that requires both. But the people who I do think that what you see on the progressive left now, we can kind of tap into the mayoral election in New York City. I mean, you have a group of people who voted for a man who's offering them exactly what we've seen in the past many times, yet these voters believe he's fresh and new. Those are their words. And they're young, they're about my age and younger, and they're elite, college educated, and they're wealthy, a lot of
Mm.
them. And they're transplants. They moved to New York City. They've only been there for, I just looked at exit polls last night, no more than 10 years.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. So
Uh-huh.
the
Uh-huh.
people, the majority who voted for
Done.
him
Uh-huh.
were transplants.
Yep.
Wow.
And there's this idea of downward mobility. They come from wealthy parents and they fear their downward mobility. They fear not being as comfortable as their parents. They fear what's going to happen next. They feel the uncertainty economically. All of that is, that's valid. The system kind of sucks. In when I say the system, I think both sides, both populist movements, or just populism in general, has its finger on a pulse that makes sense. But without going too deep into that, I know some listeners might want to go a bit deeper into that. But the point that I'm really getting at, I think, is more important, is this existential feeling of, this fragmented feeling of, where do I belong? What do I do? What the hell is looming in the future? I have no idea. Here's this man who's offering me all these, answers, and it's typical. It's the script. It's the kind of template that's perfect for a person who feels uneasy about their lives, who can latch onto this maternal, paternalistic edifice or structure or whatever that's promising them sort of shelter from the world. And I'm not saying that everyone who voted for him doesn't have a sense of self. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, I think they do live in a constant existential kind of mental environment, if you will. And I think that there's a truth to it because we are in precarious times. Though it was funny to see that most of his supporters thought a redistributive tax system was necessary. And I mean most of his supporters, but then most of his supporters, or half of them, felt that the New York City economy was in good shape. I mean, there's some
Hmm.
very odd, dissonant things if you look at those exit polls,
Mhm.
and I think it's because um, these are people who are not economically savvy. They're not really. It doesn't seem like they're really learned in the spread of political theory. They're sort of locked into postmodernism, postcolonialism, anything after Marx. And I think that there's a sense of confusion, internal confusion, and to then whittle it down a little bit to the psychological, I think individually these people do have potentially have higher levels of anxiety and
Mhm.
maybe more representation of mood disorders and personality disorders on the in the cluster B.
Mhm.
Um, I tend to think so.
Mhm.
Not everyone, but I think that they coalesce around this I sort of fusion with a group that becomes their identity. I mean, there's actually a construct in psychology called identity fusion where it's not identity fusion is not the same as social identity where
Mhm.
you love your sports team, your
Mhm.
church community, your whatever, and you feel really connected,
Mhm.
but you're able to disentangle. You're able to actually walk away from it and say, okay, that was that, and I'm me, and yeah, I'm connected with that group, but
Mhm.
that's not my personhood.
Mhm.
We're not inextricably linked. It's like going to a movie and you become the character, or it's like you're a voyeur and you become so in, sort of like entangled with the characters and you feel like you're in it, and then you leave the theater and you're like it attenuates, it kind of goes away after a while,
Mhm.
and you're
Mhm.
like, okay, back to real life. But for people who are high in identity fusion, they leave the theater and they're in the scene still.
Mhm.
It doesn't dwindle down or anything. So I do think that people who have that propensity, who are drawn to the group as if it were really them themselves, it's one and the same. A sense of oneness is what the construct defines is
Mhm.
defined as. I think that there's an existential sort of like sort of maybe a fragmented sense of self to some degree, a fear of maybe some of these people didn't like I've used the word before, individuate. Maybe they didn't. Maybe we can get psychodynamic. We can get behavioral. We can go into the psychological. I think it's about time we not in our conversation per se, but generally I think it's about time we really do,
Mhm.
because there's there's a lot of literature that's coming out that's showing these effects,
Mhm.
and it's too much for it to be a coincidence. And I think that when you see the revolutionary uprisings, there's a certain pathology there of confusion, of not knowing where anything is. We can't find a locus of stability,
Mhm.
and in my view, with what we're seeing in politics today, it's not clear that there's an economic strain on people, but it's just not clear to me that these people in New York City are feeling the same strains as, say, other revolutions. I could be wrong about that, but it just seems to fall from an upstream
Mhm.
locus that is more or less from the academy, postmodernism, like I said, post-colonialism. It seems to be coming from an ideology
Hmm.
and not entirely from, a lived experience. That was a lot to say and probably a little presumptuous of me, but I do wonder what you think about that too, unless you had something else you wanted to reach
Oh,
into. Yeah.
those are really interesting. I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, and I am going to betray my ignorance around New York politics a bit. But
Hmm.
wasn't Mamdani running against Cuomo?
Yes.
And wasn't
Hmm.
Cuomo, uh, was he the mayor during COVID?
He was the governor of New
Governor? Oh,
York.
governor. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think about, there was this pathologization, actually not even that, it was just a dehumanization of Trump voters when I was in
Yes.
graduate school,
Yes.
when I was in this counseling program. And this was the first time I got exposed to it on an institutional level where you had this knee-jerk disdain for the Trump supporter. And I think one of the fallacies in that was to think that everybody who votes for a given politician is some rah ardent fan. Like a lot of people
Hmm.
vote for a politician based on not liking the other guy, or, I
Right.
don't really like either of these people, but I kind of like what this guy says about this thing, and that's an important policy to me. So I'm going to overlook things that I don't like about him and go with him. And so I wonder in New York if in some ways, and I guess this could get granular and we probably want to stay away from that. But just to put it out there, one thought I have is if Cuomo is on the menu, I might not go for that.
Yeah.
And I and
Absolutely.
I might not even have to really like the other guy to think, oh, heck no, what happened during COVID in New York was ridiculous, and I'm not going to have any part of ever supporting. So you have this poverty of choice, and so
Yeah.
then you're making the best choice you can. So I
Yeah.
don't know. And there is exit polling. You're speaking more to the things that people have actually said, not a bunch of conjecture about who did what. And I just think in a democracy, when you have such a poverty of choice so often,
Yeah.
there are
So true.
lots of reasons. When I fill out we fill out our ballots usually the day of election day. I'm always a last minute voter. And so we're looking at it and we're looking at this person versus that person. We're reading all these things and we're reading about these proposals and things and trying to make the best choice you can. But I, the guy I vote for councilman, I'm not like a him supporter. I just thought on balance, he probably said some things that I liked a little bit more than the other guy, or one of his policy suggestions. Oh, yeah, well, he makes a little bit more sense there. But I wouldn't call myself a that guy supporter, you know? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I think it's easy to sort of diagnose that whole group as it's kind of the same community thing, right? Like Trump
Yeah.
supporter, Mamdani supporter, LGBT community. You're still talking about a really diverse array of individuals, but more to what you were getting at, this idea of the high anxiety, the sort of low information, high
Hmm.
anxiety reasons why people
Hmm.
might align themselves with the progressive alarmism, I suppose, that they're hearing on
Yeah.
that side. The let's change this. This thing isn't working.
Right.
I might be getting off the path
No,
by pointing
I
those things
actually,
out.
no, actually, you've actually, on the contrary, you've made my aperture a little bit more, like calibrated because I have two things to go on what you just said. So just to say them out loud so I can remember. The one is about sort of the lesser of two evils kind of thing. That's just sort of a note for me to keep pinned. And then the other one is this high anxiety crowd. Okay, so that's going to make sense in a second. Okay, so let me address the second one first. Interestingly, when I looked at the exit polls last night, I framed it next to a study that came out in 2024. It's a network model, which is just kind of putting a bunch of nodes together to create a sort of a web connected dots.
Mm.
These are the participants in the data. Just so listeners have a visual, think of a web, and connecting. There's dots in that comprise this web, and they're all connected dots. And then on one side, you have liberals. The other side, you have conservatives. And the web for the conservative, the researchers ran their tests, and what they did was asked questions about race, gender, the whole smorgasbord of issues, and attitudes towards those things. And they found that when all was said and done, they did their analysis that progressives, or however they labeled it, liberals, progressives. I know people go nuts about labeling and categories these days, but progressives were clumped together very tight. And so this is really saying that there's not much variation in how people on the left, at least in this sample, felt about the issues.
Mm-hmm.
Not much variation there. On the right, and this makes sense because you had migration, you had a lot of people move over to the right, as it were. I mean, maybe not per se ideologically in full, but you had a migration, a big walk away, you had waves of people walking away, right? And maybe this is another empirical question to know, well, is it that people migrated over there, that the web is much more expanded to show that there's more variation in how people on the right think about issues? It's interesting, but the effect showed that there is a wider web, a more opened web, I should say, showing that, again, on the issues, people on the right think more broadly and differently from each other, from the next person, as compared to the next person on their side, I should say. And when you compare the two groups, you can actually visualize this model, and you could see the clumped together left and the spread out right. And then you look at the exit polls yesterday, and you see that effect. A quarter of upward 30% of the voters who answered this particular poll, how do you identify with very liberal, right? Liberal, moderate, etc., very conservative. It was upwards, I think, is 80 something percent of people identified as very liberal, and then the rest of the data showed a more evened out, kind of dispersed effect, or result rather, where people who said they were very conservative, it was not as pronounced as you had moderate people who voted for Cuomo, I should say. I'm missing a big point. I'm sorry. People who voted for Mamdani considered themselves to be very liberal, and that was 83% of people represented in that particular poll. Whereas people who voted for Cuomo did not identify as very conservative, or for the other Republican candidate did not also identify as very conservative, to the extent that the Mamdani supporters identified as very liberal. And it shows, for listeners, just to make it a little easier, because it is a little confusing, that effect in that research, in that empirical study, showing a clumped together web of liberals with not much variation in how they think and view things, their attitudes towards issues. You see this effect in the exit polls. You see more people identifying as very liberal who voted for Mamdani, showing a unit that is just, this is a real world effect. So that is one part of it, where then you start to look into the issues that they are interested in, and his policies, and you can go down a whole rabbit hole about how they, correlate with certain psychological constructs and personality traits, and that's just can get exhaustive. But I do think that in my view, I think a lot of what they want comes from a place of trying to ameliorate an existential dread or a heightened level of anxiety. I don't think it's based on substantive economic prowess or an understanding of
Mm.
how these policies will not work. I think it's just an imminent need for change and feels and vibes, and he's just fresh and he's new, and they don't think beyond that lens. And I think it's because they are in that state of anxiety. And then the other part of it is, I think I was thinking about this yesterday actually. Mom Donnie is the inverse to Trump, I would say. Um, Trump ran on a bunch of things that people found to be abhorrent, and then a bunch of people found to be great. And they, quote, didn't care how he said it. They just wanted him because he's different and he's not the status quo. Well, it looks like that's kind of the same for Mamdani supporters. Like they just
Mm.
wanted something
Mm.
different, not the status quo. And they don't care about the socialism thing. They don't care. They just want something different. And
Mhm.
in fairness, it would be a double standard to say, this is crazy. Oh my God, we're
Mhm.
screwed. Mamdani's in. Well, there was a whole bunch of people who felt that way about Trump.
Mhm.
And and then you had the scandals with Cuomo. Why would people, quote, get on board and just vote for
Mhm.
Cuomo
Mhm.
if, like Trump, I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm just zooming out and saying if, like Trump, he was convicted, though I'm not sure that Cuomo was convicted. I don't want to speak on something I don't know for sure, but anyway, he was involved in that sexual harassment lawsuit. Why would someone who's sort of more democratic or liberal, if you will, get on board and vote for someone who is sort of a mirror to the antithesis of their values, that being Trump, who
Mhm.
they've been honking the horn about being a deviant, sexual assault or, kind of.
Mhm.
So why would they? So he was an awful candidate, Cuomo.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's so much here to discuss. I mean, I think I think the expectation that anyone would get on board is sort of has been the DNC's go-to. Just get on board. I was a Bernie supporter at first, in
Mhm.
2016, and then the second time
Yeah, me
around,
too.
yeah, and then I actually voted for Trump this past time around, and but I remember being the person who was told you can't you cannot vote for Bernie. A vote for Bernie is a vote for Trump. Vote for Biden. You don't know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. And I was shamed into, uh,
Hillary.
when yeah, Hillary, I got on board for, Biden the second time around, which,
Yeah.
and so I, I wouldn't want to tell a person just to get on board because I think that's part of the problem we have.
Mm.
And you said the poverty of
Mhm.
options. When you're met with so few options, I wouldn't even say few, I would say two. Um,
Mhm.
you and then you're living in that dissonance and disenchantment, disillusionment. You're going to go with the person who speaks a very sort of sexy rhetoric and shiny and smiley.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well,
So,
and I don't know how much the impact of COVID is reverberating with people, but for me, I mean, if you put Jay Inslee, who was the governor of Washington State during
oh
COVID and was
yeah,
an absolute tyrant, an
oh yeah,
absolute, um,
I remember.
just such a fool and
Yeah,
such just spoke nonsense with a soft voice that sent
yeah,
many people into painful isolation and old people into lonely death. And
yeah. Hmm.
if you put him on a ballot, I don't know that I would care what was opposite him. I'd probably vote for whoever that was. I mean,
Yeah, that
it'd
makes so
just
much
be
sense.
like, no, it was a referendum on COVID. You could not get me to vote for that man ever again.
Yeah,
So I don't
I
know how
totally
much that
agree.
impacted people with, I don't know if there's an analog here with Cuomo, but
Yeah, I think
um,
so because he did the same thing. He was this
mhm.
sex offender slash grandma killer because
Yeah,
he you know about the story of him and the nursing homes, right? Yeah,
a little
he
bit. Yeah.
put a lot of elderly people uh,
Oh, it's just
into
horrible. It's just horrible.
hospitals, from hospitals into nursing homes,
Yeah.
and lots of older folks ended up dying. So yeah,
Well,
awful.
your point about the wider web on the right, I thought was really interesting. And I think this gets more philosophical than empirical, but it's interesting
Hmm.
to ponder some of these things like if you go back to the framing and you think, well, if you're more conservative, then you're conserving because you think there's something of value already here or worth staking a claim on, whatever that might
Right.
be. And that's usually going to be traditions and families and specific types of communities, maybe religion, maybe um, value sets that you have. So you're I would imagine you'd see less of a monoculture there because you have people who are wanting to conserve what they have, not
Yeah.
necessarily open it up to the group think. Like
Right.
and so
Right.
you're going to have a variety of, you're going to have that insular sort of resistance to the false teaming of fake community. I mean, you see it
Yeah.
online
Yeah.
for sure. You see the conservatives online have all kinds of the infighting and whatever. There's just constant, you said this about this and you said that about that, and we don't like this guy anymore. But I don't know that that really represents what real American conservatives are about or like.
Yeah. Especially social media. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on
Right.
the more leftist end of things, you have the existentialism, the response to why do you want to progress? Why do you want things to be different? Because things
Hmm.
are not okay right now. This is not okay. We need things to change. This is not so we don't value very much, or we have less value for what is. And then you have that lack of purpose, the anomie, the I don't know what my life is worth, and I don't feel like I don't, part of why I'm upset is things are not okay for people like me, and we can't live a good life. We don't have a pathway to live well. And so we're looking for that. And then we attach ourselves to these causes and you attach yourself to
Right.
these groups. And then, like you were saying before, there's that. I love this concept of identity fusion, by the way. And I'd love
Yeah.
to hear you
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that. But that,
Yeah.
that group loyalty that says, okay, these people, we all found purpose. We're all pointing at the mission. And I don't want to mess that up by bringing up incoherencies or places where this is discordant and maybe I have a question. And so you end up with more of that loyalty and that groupist mentality because that is a
Yeah.
proxy for purpose in these in a large number of these folks that are more progressively identified. And you get ideas like the
Yeah.
Omnicause, like
Hmm.
Greta Thunberg, who is, she'll jump from this over to that and over to this, and she's just every it's the fist, but it's for fist for Palestine and now fist for gay rights or the environment or whatever it is. So it's just every single thing. You can be a fighter. You can just your mission can now be protest. I just
Right.
protest. And then when they tell me, oh, it's Ukraine, so now I'm going to protest for Ukraine or
Right.
against Russia, and I'm not saying that there aren't reasons. I mean, I think that it's great to be aware of environmental impact and try to reduce
Sure.
pollution or to be aware of America's relationship with foreign countries and have opinions on that. That's totally fine. And
Right.
but there's this fervor that becomes that fusion that you're talking about, which would
Yeah.
result in
Yeah.
that high identification with the extreme liberal, the
Ye-
extreme position.
Yeah. That's yes. Yes. And I should be fair and also say that you tend to see this fusion effect happen also with isolationists. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and this is sort of a parenthetical, and then I'll go into fusion a bit more, but because there's interesting research on that in relation to this, like the Greta effect. They should call it a Greta effect. Um, but you do have this faction on the political right now that's emerging, the Nick Fuentes sort of isolationists. I don't know if you would call. I don't know what he is. It's probably not a good way. He's sort of a wild card, but I will say, there are people who think America first means completely withdrawing from world affairs and
Mm-hmm.
international relations and geopolitical issues, which is just not, in my view, feasible if you're going to run a powerful country like America, the United States rather. And um, you know, without getting too deep into foreign policy and all that stuff, I just think that if you close the system, like I was saying before, it's just going to explode. I mean,
Mm,
there's got to be malleability, there's got to be permeability for it to grow and breathe and to have potential for well, yeah, to grow and to be strong. I mean, because think back to Taoism and about the idea of flexibility versus rigidity.
hmm.
Anything that's just rigid parameters or a structure will break.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, isolationism is
I
is rigidity. Go
and
on,
I don't
sorry.
know at all about Nick Fuentes. He's just a brand new concept to me, and
Yeah.
I thought Brett Weinstein did a really good in discussion on him where he kind of
Hmm.
he shows check his thing out if you want to.
Sure.
I was pretty impressed with his perspective. And I don't know if I should weigh in too much because it's not a he's not a topic or a figure I know that much about, but I do get some of the America First um points, and I tend to agree. And I
Yeah.
don't think it makes me an isolationist, but what I see is like I lived in Seattle from 2009 to 2000. Well, we moved to Eastern Washington last year, or this year. Um, and I lived in and around Seattle for 16 years.
Hmm.
And I watched the city just absolutely decay from
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful place that had some rough edges and had some homelessness and some gritty areas
Hmm.
to a place that is there are rivers of trash that run
Oh,
from the tent encampments up the highway, up on all the highways and under the overpasses. There's human excrement and needles in the parks where I used to walk with my children.
that is just a shame.
It's so shocking the
Yeah.
amount of decay in America right now. So
Yeah.
part of what I hear when I hear an America First, I guess, policy perspective is let's get a handle on, let's go Jordan Peterson here.
Yeah.
Let's clean our
Yeah.
room before we go and tell other people or get
I
involved or
agree.
spend
Yeah.
any more of our tax dollars on wars in Ukraine and et
Yeah.
cetera. Like
Yeah.
fix the stuff that's happening here because it's decaying. Our beautiful cities are falling apart. And Seattle's just one of
Right.
many that are like that right now. And so immigration is a problem, obviously, and then that divides people terribly with how do we address that. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I guess I think that maybe there is an isolationist perspective that might not be good, but I fail to see a way to criticize the America First when America's in such dire straits right now.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very fair point, and it's so nuanced because, well, maybe it's not so nuanced. Maybe it's much simpler than being nuanced. I mean, it is what it is. You're seeing a decline. It's material. It's visible. We're going to see that in New York City.
Mhm.
We saw it under De Blasio and other mayors like with a more socialist bent. It's just, and the reaction is to want to hone in and to, again, to really figure out how to fix what's going on in your immediate area. And yeah, I don't think that that's the isolationist that I'm thinking about. I think there are people who fervently believe, and maybe I'm overblowing this a little bit, but I think that there's a subset of people who believe that we just ought not to deal with any foreign relations, and that's probably again maybe a bit of an absolutist
Mm.
take on it, but it's not gone without reflection or looking into it at least anecdotally, and I think that maybe people unlike yourself who don't have a more like nuanced take on world relations where there are consequences. You can't just back out of things without there being consequences. And then if you do, you kind of have to fix them because it's either an emergency or you're dealt with a binary. Like we
Mm.
just pulled out of Afghanistan like they did under Biden.
Oh
We have an
gosh.
emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like there's cause and effect. What I'm trying to say is just to quickly make the point a little clearer is when it comes to Israel and just our relationship with it's a very complicated topic to just bring up on a flash,
Mhm.
just like, oh, let
Mhm.
me just bring that up. But the idea of not doing anything is doesn't come without major consequences, regardless of the idea or the theories or the fact, perhaps even that there's a financial benefit there that's underhand, sort of under the table and something
Mhm.
that we should criticize. But still, there's still cause and effect. And I think isolationists who are hell bent on just not dealing with the world and outside of America have sort of this fusion. It's different though from what you're saying, because what you're saying, there's an imminent problem. It's again, it's material. It's right in front of you.
Mhm.
Identity fusion is more when you can't distinguish between yourself and a group. So people who
Mhm.
are true, they say that they're true Americans and America first, not in the way you're saying, and I'm not trying to not ruffle your feathers. I'm just saying there's a difference
Mhm.
here,
Yeah.
is that there people they even get to the point of going back to this, like, I don't know if you would say nativism, or this back to this original idea of America being just all white
Mm.
and sort
Is
of the
that the
their
Fuentes take?
yeah, I
Okay.
think. Yeah, and I
This
don't.
guy, one of
Yeah,
the things I thought when I heard him, because I listened to the Tucker interview and I thought, why are people paying attention to this guy? Why don't we just let him
and they
be
will.
off in the
Yeah, I
corner?
know.
Because
Yeah,
he said some smart things. I mean, he made some points that were like,
and
oh,
that's where
that's
he'll
very
get he'll get
intelligent. But then he got
he'll
to
get
the
people.
end and his take on women was like,
Yeah.
basically girls drool and boys rule, and it was very childish. And I just thought, why, let the guys, let him talk to his people and ignore him, because he's got a very, I
Yeah.
don't know. And I tend to like Tucker. I've been a Tucker fan for ages and ages. I
Yeah.
think he's a very sensible person when you listen to his thoughts. I don't agree with him on everything, but I tend to like him. And I thought he did a fairly good job offering a counterpoint to the
Yeah,
Fuentes.
I didn't watch the interview, but I know people came down hard on him because he didn't push against Fuentes's take on Lenin or Stalin or something. I think it was Lenin. I don't
Oh,
remember.
yeah, he just
Yeah.
mentioned, if I recall correctly, he mentions like big fan of him, and then Tucker's response was like, "Really?" And then that was it, and
Yeah.
they just moved on. So maybe he
And
could
then
have gone
yeah.
into it like, "What do you mean?" And
Right, right.
but it was a
But
more friendly interview than that. So maybe that's
yeah,
what
and
people
I
had
didn't.
a problem with.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't. In fairness, I didn't watch the interview, so I
Hmm.
should. But um, yeah, I guess what I'm really getting at is you don't only see identity fusion on the left. It's not only a leftist
Hmm.
phenomenon, but I would argue, and again, this is an empirical question, as to whether or not there is an asymmetry there if it is expressed more on the left, because it necessitates a oneness with like a an abandonment of of personhood, of autonomy, of the sense of self, and to mesh it, to intermesh
Yeah,
with a group. And
that's
you know
really interesting because it's kind of
yeah,
like a,
yeah,
it's like an meshing with the mission, making your identity. It's seeking a purpose that's outside of the tangible parts of your life that are idiosyncratic and unique to you, but they are rather a part of something that is bigger. It's that the whole community idea, and you can see that forming. It seems like a very online phenomenon, and there's plenty of people who are right wing online and plenty of people who are left wing online. And so
right,
why wouldn't you see it on both sides, so to speak? It's
yeah,
it's sort of like
yeah,
this cultural zeal.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. It's interesting. And that there was a study that was done that looked into uh, now this. We know, for those of us who, I mean, I guess probably most of your listeners would understand this, and you, of course, would, but samples in research and psychology research were often at one point very much so like undergrads in college um, that were that would be studied. These would
Hmm.
be participants in studies, which doesn't give you good generalizability. You can't conduct, a study on a
Hmm.
question and get a result with one age group in college and
Hmm.
say this effect or this outcome or these results generalize to the broader, community or broader, what am I trying to say? Just
Society in
multi-demographic
general. Yeah.
society. Yeah, but this one was actually a good study that, or I should say, a good example of a study that used college students in a way that made sense. They looked at U.S. and U.K. college students, and they had them read vignettes of Palestinian and Kurdish people, uh, and their conditions. The Palestinians' gripe and grievance around being subjugated by Western imperialism. And then they read the Kurdish people's gripe, fighting a war,
Mm.
living in desperate times and suffering. Both groups were suffering, going through upheaval, all that stuff. It's just that the framework was different and the reasons
Mm.
why they were going through these things differed. Well, it turns out the long and short of it is that the students who identified as liberal, again, liberal, progressive,
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
categorical problem, I know, but let's just, some people hate when liberal is
Mhm.
used. I get it, but
Yeah.
we're just going to use it. Um, the liberal students very heavily fused with the Palestinians
Mhm.
and didn't fuse at all with the Kurdish
Oh,
people.
that's so interesting.
The interesting effect, that's interesting, but the part to me that's like when you read studies and you're like,
Mhm.
your jaw drops sometimes, like, wow, that's a rare thing to feel like, okay, that's something, was when they took the Palestinian condition
Mhm.
of being oppressed by Western imperialism and applied it to the Kurdish people,
Mhm.
and the effect was the same. The students fused the same degree as they fused with the Palestinians with the Kurdish people. So it wasn't about the people; it was about the
Mm.
condition.
It was because
So
they were so fused with the idea of being marginalized or
that's
being
right.
oppressed. Mm.
Yeah. So there's a conditionality there, and it's concerning because then you get into the idea of, well, are they really? Is this really about injustice? I mean, I guess it is if you think about the condition itself being something that you feel yourself are experiencing of
Mhm.
being oppressed, but um, it does it does make you wonder where they are now. Now that how many Christians are being slaughtered, there's it's when you stand on the stage of moral superiority, um, righteousness, uh, being more evolved socially, spiritually, all of the above, and in it for the underdog, all this stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but you're vacant. You're not there for suffering that goes on outside your purview. That's not actually um, exercising the kind of framework you claim to
Mhm.
exercise. That's something called parochial empathy. It's selective
Mhm.
empathy,
Mhm.
and it doesn't do a good job. It doesn't do a service to the progressive script. And I think a lot of people see that and they see that there's dissonance there. That how can you claim to be so good, but you're not saying anything about
Mhm.
suffering as it pertains to people getting killed who are not within your purview, who are not
Mhm.
within your periphery of
They're not the
of
right, they don't have the right markers on
conditions.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, that was one thing that really set me off and what made me detach from the left.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, the right has its problems too, but I think when I think with identity fusion, you're tapping into something fundamentally psychological to the individual that perhaps going back to the earlier point about anxiety or existentialism and feeling at odds, um, there's there's a confusion, I think, about how to belong and how to make sense of yourself in the world. Um, and sometimes I feel kind of lousy saying that because I don't like to generalize a group of people like that. And I don't it's funny because I love science and I kind of love statistics, I love analysis, but I also don't like to say, oh, every Mamdani supporter, I wouldn't say every, but most Mamdani supporters are probably dealing with an anxiety disorder. It just feels plastic to me,
Mm,
but there's something there that
mm,
could be closer to the truth than not.
mm. It's so fascinating. I really appreciate the difficulty in trying to kind of walk that fine line between identifying trends and general
Yeah,
um, observations in people, but also holding on to the humanity and the individuality of the people you're talking about.
it's
It
hard.
all centers on that, doesn't it? It's kind of like the
Yeah,
very beginning of the conversation talking about the concept of the LGBT community or whatever
yeah,
community. The Mamdani community, they're going to be
yeah,
just as disparate, but there's something there that could
yeah,
be observed also, and it is a difficult thing. It's kind of threading the needle.
yeah. And I guess for me to cap what I was just saying, and not to come not to try to both sides it or to try to save face. I mean that genuinely. Um, but there there is a concerning pattern arising on the right also. Um, you have a faction that is also really fused to religious identity. They sort of make law and religion inextricable. Um, and it's not all of them, but there's groups of people. There's a group that believes that, when you say America is a Christian nation, I mean, we could totally talk about that being true philosophically, Judeo-Christian. Like
Mm,
I'm not going to dispute that, but there are people who they become also very uncomfortable with nuance and ambiguity when you start to say stuff like, well, that's not quite the case. It's not quite the case that we are ipso facto, like we are, because now you're sort of, not you, but now they're sort of teetering. Now they're kind of playing with a theocracy.
mhm,
And so just to lay it out there on the record, there is a faction there, but the very last thing I'll say is I still think, and I made a video about this, there is an asymmetry in that effect, and I do think it's more pronounced as per the data that I shared earlier and
mhm,
many other bits of data
mhm,
like it. I think it is more pronounced on, it's my view, it's more pronounced on the political left these
mhm,
days.
mhm.
And that's where I stand. I'm happy to be challenged on that if anybody hearing this wants to, but
That's
that's
interesting.
where I stake my claim.
Well, and I wonder if as we go more and more online, if we'll see a shift, because I think that there's a correlation between that, coming back to the idea of standing looking up at the stars. The more we
Mm,
grapple with humanity at scale, the more we
yeah,
lose the sense of who we are and what the actual purpose and opportunity in our own life is. And
yeah,
so as we go online more and more, I expect to see more of that existential purpose seeking on all sides. And it'll attach to whatever it is that you're being exposed to, whatever you're being offered. Like, are you, around a lot of people who are offering you an LGBT experience or a perspective? Are you around a lot of people who offer you an environmentalist or a climate or a progressive left? Or are you around a lot of people who are offering you a Christian um, and a conservative perspective? If that's being done at scale online or through an educational institution of sorts, not through your
mm,
own I think we have this desire to, when we look at scale, we want to see our purpose reflected back, and so we start trying to change the people out there to
yeah,
give us
yeah.
comfort. And I wonder how much of this identitarianism and this fusion process is because we're losing our purpose because we're grappling with scale. And I know I just
That's
said
such a
like
good.
a bunch of circular things, but I really feel
No,
like there's something I'm
I,
observing in that.
I think you are. Yeah, I again, and then going back just to meld a
Mhm.
former point that was that came after what you said. What I said earlier is I think that what you're explaining, my sort of sense is that it's us trying to, and I don't know if this is the right answer, but it's us trying to attenuate, sort of ameliorate the anxiety, the existential kind of feeling of spaciousness and
Yeah.
ambiguity, and to try to deal with that by, we have all these options. We're trying to simplify, and we
Mhm.
end up collapsing things down to very simplistic categories.
Mhm.
Because, yeah, I don't know if that meets
Yeah,
with what you're saying to some degree, but I think worth, I think it's absolutely worth exploring because it lands philosophically and it lands cognitively.
we should
Um,
come up with a name for this.
yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, it, it's, I think it would be an important area of research.
Hmm.
And if anybody's interested in the identity fusion, it's by Swan et al. Swan was the seminal, I think he's from UT Austin, and it was first published in 2005, I believe.
Hmm.
And they wanted to understand extremist behavior, terrorist behavior.
Oh, interesting.
Um, and this came out around the same time as the literature. What is it? Moral Convictions. It's called Moral Convictions by Skitka. I can't remember, but around
Hmm.
that time, and these two bits of literature wanted to explore extremism in more depth. Um, so, uh, if anybody's who's listening is interested in those two bits of research, that it's worth your time for sure. But yeah, I think you're onto something. I think it's true about I like the stars analogy.
Hmm.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a shrinking of the self and then a fear of blinking out. Yeah, I feel like there's so much more to say, and we barely scratched the surface on this discussion, but I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Uh,
Same.
maybe
Same.
maybe I could get you to come join us for a live stream one of these Mondays if you're up for it. We do a
I would
live
love
stream every
that.
Monday at 10 Pacific, which I think is 1 Eastern.
Yeah, I would love that.
Okay,
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be
cool.
great.
Yeah,
Thank you
that'd
for
be
that.
awesome. Maybe in a couple weeks we'll have you on.
Perfect. And I thank you so much for having me. It was so great to explore different ideas with you. And I hope your audience is okay with me. I mean, I'm a member of your audience, but I hope that they're all right with the exploration. It's sort of a bit of a free flowing thing I did today a little bit. So I hope it's all
Well, I
right.
really like that. I like having a natural conversation with
Yeah.
someone rather than like a scripted interview. Maybe it's my lack of organization. I don't think I could put together a scripted interview in the first place, but I kind of also like the organic nature of just seeing what ideas are coming up. And I think
Yeah.
that's really enjoyable.
You listen back and then points hit. You don't
Hmm.
think in the moment when you're
Yeah.
speaking, you're like, what did I just say? But then you listen
Yeah.
back and there's something there. Yeah, it's iterative. I like that approach. Yeah.
Where can people find you if they're interested in hearing your podcast or reading anything you've written, etc., online?
Yeah, great. So I'm active on Instagram. It's just at Anthony Rispo. And I post reels on there and other things about social cognition, political psychology, and I do breakdowns around those topics. And I also am a co-host of a podcast, Discourse Lab. It's the underscore Discourse Lab on Instagram, and you can listen to the podcast on any streaming service, and that would be Discourse Lab. My co-host is Clay Smith, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to do that. And I think the only other thing is I do have a Substack, and I write there. I submit stuff. I don't submit. I publish is what I'm trying to say, as much as I can, and I'm trying to get better at it. But so those are the things, and there's probably more to come at some point. But that's it for now. Yeah,
Well, awesome. I'm going to go follow you on Instagram. And
great. Yeah, same. Yeah,
yeah, it was so nice to meet you and speak with you. And I look forward to talking with you again soon.
likewise. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.